Clearwater County Court was the kind of building that looked cold even when the sun was out. White stone, tall glass, no warmth anywhere. And that morning, with the winter fog rolling over the parking lot like slow smoke, it felt even colder. The kind of cold that gets under your skin before you even open the damn door. Sophie Lane hesitated right at the entrance. She was tiny, 9 years old maybe, and honestly, she looked more like a shadow than a kid. Too thin, too pale, eyes wide in that way kids' eyes get when they've seen things they never should have seen. Her fingers were clenched so tight around the leash in her hand. Her knuckles turned white. And beside her, yeah, that was Atlas. Atlas wasn't a puppy, soft, goofy family dog. He was a retired K9, sable and gold coat, ears sharp. A dog who looked like he remembered every scream, every chase, every night spent running toward danger. Even walking slow beside her, he carried this weight, like he already knew where they were heading, and hated it. A bailiff opened the courtroom door, muttering, "Bring her in." Sophie didn't move at first. Not because she didn't want to, more like her body forgot how. Her breath shook, just a little, like a paper bag crinkling. And Atlas, he didn't nudge her. He didn't pull the leash. He just stepped close enough that his shoulder brushed her leg. A silent, "You can do this." She followed. And the second that courtroom swallowed her up, everything tightened. The silence, the eyes, the smell of old wood and too much perfume, the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. You could almost hear her heartbeat in the air. People stared, some with pity, some with suspicion, some with boredom, honestly. Like a kid on the stand was just another Tuesday. But then, Victor Klein stood up. And look, if evil ever put on a $3,000 suit and practiced smiling in the mirror, it'd look exactly like that guy. Perfect hair, perfect tie, perfect little "I care so much" expression glued onto his face. He walked toward Sophie like a pastor approaching a choir girl. "Oh, sweetheart," he said, loud enough for the whole gallery to hear. "You're so brave to be here." But then, he leaned down, way too close, predator close, and in a voice so soft no one else caught it, so low it slid under the noise of the courtroom like a knife slipping under ribs. He whispered, "If you open that mouth of yours, that dog dies first." Just like that. No emotion, no hesitation, just venom, wrapped in sugar. And Sophie? She froze, like every muscle in her body shut off at the same time. Eyes blown wide, breath stuck halfway up her throat. If fear could reach out and strangle a kid with bare hands, that's exactly what it looked like. Victor straightened up, smiling. God, that smile. Then he turned, like nothing happened. Nobody noticed. Nobody except Atlas. He didn't growl, didn't move forward, didn't bare his teeth. Just a flick, barely there, of his left ear. And if you knew dogs like Atlas, you'd know that wasn't nothing. That was a warning signal firing deep inside him, like a match sparking in the dark. Sophie's hand trembled so hard the leash shook. She tried to breathe, tried to swallow, tried to pretend she didn't feel like she might faint. But her whole body kept folding in, like she wanted to disappear into her own shoes. A juror whispered, "Poor kid." They didn't know, they couldn't know. Her knees buckled, just for a second, and Atlas, God bless that dog, shifted just enough that her leg touched the thick fur of his shoulder. Not big, not dramatic, just steady, solid, warm, and instantly, the tiniest sliver of air slipped back into Sophie's lungs. Not much, but enough. The bailiff gestured toward the witness seat. "Come on, sweetheart." She didn't look up. Not once. She walked like someone moving through a nightmare. Every step too slow, too careful, like the floor might swallow her whole. Atlas kept pace beside her, head low, eyes locked onto Victor Klein with an intensity that didn't match his stillness. And if anyone had been paying attention, really paying attention, they might have noticed the way Atlas's muscles tightened, barely visible beneath his coat. He'd heard something. He'd understood something. He'd filed something away. But nobody saw it. Not yet. The judge adjusted his glasses, glanced over the courtroom, and said, "Let the record show the witness is present." But the real record, the one that mattered, that had already started, hidden right under Atlas's fur. And the moment it did, something in the air shifted. So slow, so quiet. Only one creature in the room noticed. The dog. And the thing is, the courtroom wasn't even the beginning. Not really. Because the fear Sophie carried in there, the kind that squeezed her small body like a fist, that fear had a mother, a birthplace, a night that still lived under her skin. And that night? Yeah, that's where everything actually started. It was 3 months earlier, way out in the suburbs of Clearwater. A quiet street, the kind where porch lights glow soft, where people leave pumpkins out even when it's not Halloween anymore. Nothing scary, nothing movie level, just normal. Until it wasn't. It was just after 10 p.m. Sophie had been coloring on the living room floor, something with blue crayons, and her mom was in the kitchen humming along to the old radio. The house felt warm, safe, lived in. A boring Wednesday night, the kind kids are supposed to forget about. Then, bang! Not a knock, not even close. More like someone trying to break the whole damn door down. Sophie jumped so hard the crayon snapped in her fingers. Her mom froze, spatula clattering onto the tile. Who is that?" her mom called out, voice already shaking. She took one step toward the hallway. Just one. Bang! 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 Sophie's whole body reacted before her brain did. Her small hands flew to her ears, shoulders raised, breath catching. Something ancient and instinctive inside her screamed, "Hide!" Then came the sound of glass breaking. The window by the front door shattered inward. Not loud like in movies. Sharp. Mean. Like the world tearing open. Cold night air rushed into the house. Her mom yelled, "Sophie, get back! Go to the bedroom! Go now!" But Sophie couldn't move. She was frozen on the carpet, staring at the doorway, where shadows shifted wildly, where heavy boots thudded against broken glass. Something hit the floor, metallic, hard. Something she didn't understand then, and maybe still doesn't now. And then, "Sophie, run!" Her mom shoved her toward the back hallway, just as a man's voice snarled something she couldn't make out. Sophie stumbled, landed on her hands, carpet burning her palms, but terror pushed her forward. Her breathing turned into short, broken hiccups, like her lungs had forgotten they had a job. Then the worst sound hit. Her mother screamed. Once. Long. Raw. And then silence. Not quiet. Silence. The kind that steals breath. The kind that tells you the world just ended. Sophie crawled into the small space between her bed and the wall, hands shaking too hard to cover her ears. Every muscle locked tight. Her teeth chattered though she wasn't cold. Her tears fell without her noticing. Footsteps. Slow. Heavy. Deliberate. Coming closer. The hallway creaked under his weight. The world got smaller. Tighter. Darker. Her eyes squeezed shut. She prayed, not with words, but with fear. And then all at once, red and blue lights exploded through the window. Voices shouting outside. Something slammed. Boots everywhere. The whole house shaking. But the footsteps, the ones she feared most, ran the other direction. A door crashed open. More yelling. Then, "Clear the hallway! There's a child in here somewhere!" Hands pulled the bed away. A flashlight blinded her. And the first sound anyone heard from her wasn't screaming, wasn't talking, wasn't anything you could call human. It was a tiny, shattered whimper. And that was the last sound she made for a very, very long time. After that night, the world didn't just feel dangerous to Sophie. It felt lethal. Every noise was a threat. Every shadow was a monster. Every person, someone who could hurt her. She stopped talking, yeah, but she also stopped being. The Clearwater Police Department moved her to a small therapy room inside the precinct. Pale yellow walls, 2 clean floors, and a plant in the corner that someone forgot to water. They tried to make it friendly. It wasn't. The first week, Sophie sat in a plastic chair, hugging her knees to her chest. Didn't speak, didn't cry, didn't lift her head, didn't acknowledge anyone. She didn't even look human. Just a trembling outline of one. She'd grip her left arm, right below the elbow, where purple and yellow bruises still bloomed. She'd rub that spot over and over, like the pain helped her remember something important, or forget something worse. Therapists tried everything. Gentle questions, stuffed toys, notebooks, games, music, even silence. Nothing worked. Nothing reached her. One counselor, a woman in her 50s with tired eyes and too many heartbreaks on her resume, sat outside the room one afternoon and whispered to the captain, "She's gone somewhere inside herself, and honestly, I don't know if we can get her back." Sophie heard that. She didn't react, but she heard every word. Officers tried coaxing her to draw. Nothing. Brought her hot chocolate, untouched. Someone sat across from her for an hour, breathing softly, hoping she'd follow the rhythm. She didn't. The only time she moved was when someone stepped too fast or raised their voice even a little. Then she'd curl forward, arms over her head, fingers digging into her bruises, breath collapsing like she'd been punched. People kept saying, "She needs time." But time wasn't doing a damn thing. Day after day, she sat there, silent, locked inside the memory of breaking glass and her mother's final scream. Nothing got through. Not until Carter Hayes brought in Atlas. It was a Thursday morning, one of those gray Colorado mornings where the sky looks like it's been erased and the air feels heavy enough to push you down a little. The therapy room was colder than usual. Sophie sat in her usual spot. Same chair, same posture, arms wrapped around herself like she was trying to keep all her pieces from falling apart. The clock on the wall ticked too loud. The fluorescent lights buzzed. Her shoelace was untied. She didn't care. Deputy Carter Hayes stood outside the door with Atlas beside him, one hand resting on the dog's shoulder. "All right, boy," Hayes whispered, voice low like he was speaking in a church. "No commands, no crowding. Just be there, yeah?" Atlas blinked slowly, calm in that deep, old soul way dogs get when they've lived through things humans don't even have names for. He gave one soft exhale and waited. Hayes pushed the door open. The moment Sophie saw someone entering, she flinched so fast the chair legs screeched across the floor. She curled inward, tightening up, palms flying instantly to her bruised arm. Her breathing sped up, short, panicked, the kind that makes your ribs ache. "It's okay," Hayes said quickly. His voice wasn't loud, but Sophie still flinched at the sound. He caught himself and softened even more. Hey, it's all right. I brought someone different today." Atlas stepped in, and that alone changed the air. He didn't trot in like a happy dog, didn't wag, didn't sniff around like he owned the place. He walked with quiet dignity, slow, measured, like he was reading the room, reading her, reading the way the fear clung to the walls like smoke. Sophie peeked at him from behind her knees. Just a tiny look, a flicker. Then she hid her face again. Atlas didn't react, didn't lunge toward her, didn't put his head in her hands, didn't even look directly at her. He just lowered himself. Right there, gently, with the kind of patience humans almost never have. Hayes watched from the doorway, holding his breath like any sudden sound would ruin whatever magic was happening. Atlas stretched out on the cold tile floor. First his front paws, then his chest. Then, with a soft thump, his head, directly at Sophie's feet. He didn't touch her, but he was close enough that if she moved an inch, her shoe would brush his fur. For a long moment, nothing happened. Just breathing. His slow, even, steady breathing. Sophie kept her knees tight against her chest. Her eyes darted sideways, watching him without moving her head. Her fingers twitched. She loosened her grip, just a little, like she was testing whether she could let go without falling apart. Atlas exhaled, a deep, warm sigh, and his tail slid across the floor with the faintest tap. Just one. A peace offering. Sophie's chin quivered. Her eyes filled fast, the way water rises suddenly in a sink when someone forgets to turn the faucet off. Her bottom lip trembled so violently she bit it to keep it still. She sucked in a breath, one that sounded more like a gasp, and then a tear fell, then another, and then the dam just broke. She didn't sob at first. She just cried silently, tears pouring down her cheeks like her body had been storing them in some dark corner, waiting for permission to let them out. It had been 6 weeks. 6 weeks of silence. 6 weeks of numbness. 6 weeks of being frozen in a moment she couldn't escape. And now? A dog breathed near her feet, and her whole world cracked open. Atlas didn't lift his head, didn't look at her, didn't move to comfort her. He just breathed, slow, deep, reliable. And that was somehow a thing that undid her completely. A sound escaped Sophie, small, broken, like someone stepping on a piece of glass. She leaned forward, burying her face in her hands. Hayes swallowed hard, his throat tightening. He glanced toward the ceiling, blinking away whatever emotion crawled into his eyes. "Good boy," he whispered. So soft only Atlas heard it. After almost a minute, Sophie reached out, hesitantly, like she expected the air itself to slap her hand away. Her fingers hovered just above Atlas's fur. Just hover, not touching, not yet. Another tear slid down her cheek. Then, finally, her fingertips brushed the top of his shoulder. Atlas's ear twitched. He didn't move otherwise. Sophie pressed her hand deeper into his fur, grabbing gently, like she was afraid she'd fall unless she held on to something real, something warm, something alive. And she whispered, barely audible, breathy, cracked. Not a word, just a sound that meant, "Help me." Atlas responded by doing absolutely nothing, and yet, somehow, everything. His breathing stayed steady. His presence stayed calm. He let her feel him, without demanding anything back. For the first time since the night her world shattered, Sophie wasn't alone inside that dark place. There was a heartbeat beside her, a warm body, a living thing that didn't hurt her, didn't rush her, didn't fear her fear, just stayed. And in that tiny room, the one that always felt too empty, too bright, too wrong, something shifted. Not much. Not enough to fix anything. Not enough to erase the nightmares. But enough to make Sophie breathe without shaking. Enough to keep her from curling into herself like a dying leaf. Enough to let her tears fall for a reason other than terror. Sometimes, comfort doesn't look like hugs or words or promises. Sometimes comfort just lies quietly at your feet and says, "I'm here." And honestly, isn't that the kind of love we all wish we had at our lowest? Rate slow. A, B, C, or 6. Which one are you? Over the next few days, Deputy Carter Hayes started showing up to the therapy room earlier than usual. Coffee in one hand, Atlas's leash in the other. And Atlas, yeah, the dog who used to ignore everyone except whoever needed him most, walked straight to Sophie every single time. No hesitation, no wandering. Just her. Sophie would lift her eyes, just barely, like she was checking to make sure he was actually there. And that alone made Hayes smile in this small, relieved kind of way. Not a grin, just that tiny exhale that says, "Okay, maybe today won't fall apart." Hayes waited a week before he introduced something new. He knelt beside Atlas, patting the dog's shoulder. "All right, Sophie, can I show you something?" Sophie didn't speak. She still couldn't. But she shifted just enough to show she was listening. "So," Hayes continued, rubbing the back of his neck like he wasn't sure if this was a dumb idea or the smartest thing he'd ever done. "Atlas used to work with hand signals, silent ones, for situations where talking wasn't safe." He paused, looked at her. "I thought maybe you two could learn some together." Sophie blinked. That was her version of, "Go on." Hayes smiled, soft, relieved. "Okay, so, touch here." He tapped Atlas's neck gently. "Once means everything's all right. You're okay." He tapped twice. "This one means you need help." Then 3 times. "This means danger. Like, bad things are happening, please don't leave me, okay?" Sophie stared at his hands, then reached out, slow, careful, like her fingers were dipped in glass, and tapped Atlas's collar once. Atlas's ear flicked, just a twitch, but it counted. "That's good," Hayes said, voice lighting up. "He heard you." Sophie tapped again, twice. Atlas lifted his head and nudged her knee. It wasn't much, just a bump. But Sophie inhaled sharply, like it was the first breath that didn't burn going in. "He's listening to you," Hayes murmured. "You two make a good team." A team. Someone said that to her. Her. For the first time in months. Sophie looked like she believed it. The breakthrough happened on a Tuesday. A stupid, regular Tuesday. The kind nobody expects anything dramatic from. Hayes was talking quietly with a detective down the hall, while Sophie and Atlas waited in the therapy room. Then someone shouted. It wasn't at her. Just two officers arguing about paperwork. But the sound was sudden, sharp, angry, and the moment it hit the air, Sophie folded, literally folded. Her knees buckled, her arms shot up to shield her head. A tiny choking sound caught in her throat. Her whole body dropped to the floor before she even knew she was falling. And Atlas, God. The dog moved like a shadow snapping to life. 1 second he was lying down. The next, he was on his feet, posture straight, ears pinned back, planting himself between Sophie and the doorway so fast his nails scraped the tile. He didn't bark, didn't growl, didn't make a sound. He just stood. A line, a wall, a barrier that said, "You get through me, or you don't get through at all." Hayes whipped around so fast he nearly dropped his coffee. "What the— Atlas!" But Atlas didn't budge, not an inch. Sophie was curled on the floor behind him, hands clutching her ears, shaking so hard her breaths came out in stuttering gasps. Hayes went pale. What happened? What did I miss? One of the officers stammered. "We didn't mean— She didn't— We were just—" They shut up when Hayes shot them a look sharp enough to cut glass. He knelt beside Atlas, not daring to push past him. "Pitch. First. Buddy. Hey, it's okay. Let me get to her." But Atlas stayed planted, frozen solid, tail still, stance unshaken. A statue built out of instinct and loyalty. Only when Sophie's gasps slowed, just a fraction, like her body realized Atlas wasn't leaving, did he finally shift just enough for Hayes to reach her. Hayes slid an arm gently around her shoulders. "It's okay, kiddo. It's okay. I'm right here. He's right here. No one's mad. No one's touching you. You're safe." Sophie's fist still trembled, her breaths still jagged, but she didn't curl away, and she didn't close her eyes. He stood there. "Jesus," Hayes whispered. "He stood there the whole time?" A detective nodded. 14 minutes. He didn't move. Hayes stroked Atlas's head with something close to awe. "He's not just helping her calm down," he said softly. "He's protecting her again, like he never stopped working." Atlas didn't seem proud, didn't wag, didn't look for praise. He just sat next to Sophie, eyes locked on the doorway, like a soldier waiting for the next order, like he had made a vow, and fear wasn't going to break it. Sophie finally lifted one shaking hand and touched his collar. One tap. Atlas's head turned, those calm, steady eyes meeting hers. Sophie let out a breath. Slow, shaky, but real. "She told him she's okay," Hayes whispered. "My God. She used the signal." The fear didn't vanish. The trauma didn't disappear, but something new settled in the room. Something like trust. Something like safety. Something like home. And honestly, if you were watching all that unfold, let me ask you something real. Have you ever seen a moment when a dog understood a human better than any person in the room? If Atlas standing guard in that hallway proved anything, it was that Sophie finally had someone who wouldn't run. But the world? Yeah, the world wasn't done hurting her yet. Not even close. The next hearing came faster than anyone expected. Cold Friday morning, sky washed out, like Colorado couldn't decide whether to snow or rain. Sophie walked into Clearwater County Court, with Atlas glued to her side, Hayes right behind them. You could tell Sophie remembered what happened last time just by the way she held herself. Chin down, shoulders tight, fingers tangled into Atlas's collar, like she was afraid someone might rip him away if she blinked too long. Atlas didn't leave her, not even for a second. The moment the courtroom doors opened, the noise hit her like a wave. Whispering, papers shuffling, bodies shifting on wooden benches, all of it blending into a low roar that curled around her like smoke. "Court in session! Everyone rise!" Sophie flinched at the sudden shout. Atlas pressed closer, chest brushing her leg, grounding her without making a fuss. Then Victor Klein stood. And God. The man knew how to perform. He smoothed his expensive suit, adjusted his cufflinks, flashed a smile so practiced it looked like he'd rehearsed it in the mirror. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, voice honey-sweet, "we are here to uncover the truth." He walked in slow, thoughtful circles like he owned the damn room. "Now I understand," he said, placing a hand over his heart. "Yes, actually doing that. That this situation is emotional, traumatic, a child involved. It's heartbreaking." Some of the jurors nodded. Victor looked encouraged, which was already a bad sign. "But," he continued, tilting his head, "children, they can misinterpret things. They can exaggerate. Imagine." He paused. He was good at that. Too good. Shadows become monsters. Noises become threats. A frightened mind can create entire stories out of nothing. A soft murmur drifted across the gallery. Hayes muttered under his breath, "You've got to be kidding me." Victor kept going, smoother than warm butter. "Perhaps," he said, strolling toward the witness bench, "our young Sophie simply misunderstood. Perhaps fear painted a picture that wasn't real." He turned his gaze directly at her. A slow smile. Not warm. Not gentle. Sharp. Predatory. "And that's all right," he murmured, dripping with fake sympathy. "Children get confused." Sophie shrank backward, without meaning to. This was how fear worked on her. It didn't explode. It pressed, tightened, coiled around her ribs and squeezed until her breath came in thin, painful threads. Her hands trembled so hard, the wooden seat vibrated beneath her. Victor, seeing that, let the mask slip just enough for only her to see. He mouthed, "You won't talk. You can't." Sophie's eyes widened. He knew exactly what he was doing. Victor straightened again, turning to the jury as if nothing happened. "Ladies and gentlemen, this case depends not on fact, but on fear. Fear of the dark. Fear of memory. Fear of misunderstanding." He gestured loosely toward Sophie, as if she were fragile, confused, something to be pitied, not believed. And pity can be more dangerous than hate. A juror whispered, "Well, she hasn't said anything. Maybe she really—" Hayes snapped his head toward them, jaw clenched, but he couldn't yell at jurors. Meanwhile, Sophie's breaths quickened. Her fingers dug into Atlas's fur, right between his shoulders. She tried, God, she tried, to steady them, but her chest was rising too fast for her lungs to keep up. Atlas lifted his head, ears pinned back. Not fear, not aggression, alertness. A signal only someone who'd lived through hell would recognize. Sophie curled, inward, chin trembling, knees pressed tight, shoulders shaking. She wasn't making noise, but the panic poured out of her like heat. Victor pretended not to notice. Of course he didn't. He was too busy winning a performance award. "And so," he said, "before we condemn an innocent man, let us remember, children dream, children fear, children confuse." He paused, then delivered the blow. Maybe Sophie Lane simply imagined it. Hayes muttered, "You slimeball." One juror bit their lip. Another leaned back, unsure. People doubted. They doubted the one person who couldn't speak. Literally couldn't speak. And Victor Klein knew it. He looked at Sophie again, lips curling into that same razor-edged smile he used the first day. The smile that said, "I own you. Mot du tren you may. Chang lam zi duk tau ka." Sophie's chin dropped. Her hands shook violently. Her breathing broke into tiny, choppy gasps. Atlas scooted closer, shoulder touching her shin, grounding her, his presence saying, without words, "You're not alone. I'm here. I'm not moving." But Sophie didn't lift her head. Not this time. Not yet. The damage was done. Victor's poison had hit its target. And for the first time since Atlas entered her life, it almost seemed like fear was winning again. Almost. But the thing about fear, it forgets that loyalty fights back. If Victor Klein's sweet little lies were the match, then what happened next? Yeah, that was the gasoline. Because once people start doubting a child, it's crazy how fast the whole room follows along. The judge called the next witness. Some woman in a beige cardigan stepped up. One of those neighbors who acts like they know everything but really doesn't know jack, except what she sees from her window. She adjusted her glasses, cleared her throat dramatically. "Well, I've known Mr. Doyle for years, Your Honor. He's always been polite, very polite. Never raised his voice, not even once." The jury nodded. Of course they nodded. People love believing in the nice guy next door. Victor flashed her a warm smile. "And how does he treat children?" "Oh, he adores them," she said. A hand pressed over her chest, like she might faint from the sweetness of her own words. He taught my son how to ride a bike. A pause. And he volunteers at church on weekends. You could practically hear the jury melt like butter left out too long. Hayes muttered, "Oh, give me a break." Jaw tensed so hard the muscle visibly pulsed. Atlas didn't look away from the witness. Not once. His ears shifted back just a little, barely noticeable unless you knew what to watch for. But that movement? Yeah, that wasn't nothing. It was instinct. Natural warning. The kind dogs give right before things go sideways. Sophie watched the woman speak, shrinking deeper into her seat, fingers gripping the hem of her sleeve until her knuckles turned white. She didn't cry. Not yet. But her breath came out in short, hollow bursts, like someone kept tapping her spine with cold fingers. The next witness came up. Middle-aged man, button-down shirt ironed 3 times just to look credible. Mr. Doyle is a great father, a loving man, always puts his daughter first. Hayes scoffed softly. Yeah, sure he does. The man added, honestly, I think this whole thing is just, well, a misunderstanding. Sophie curled inward, shoulders folding like she was trying to disappear. Atlas moved his paw 1/2 inch until it touched her shoe. Steady, grounding, present. Victor practically glowed as each witness finished, tapping his pen, slow, cocky, like he was counting points. Then he stood. Ladies and gentlemen, what you've heard today is consistency, truth, community members who know Mr. Doyle far better than a frightened child. He didn't say it cruelly, didn't raise his voice, didn't glare at Sophie. He smiled, and somehow, that was worse. Hayes's fists clenched, knuckles white. This wasn't just lies, it was character assassination against a kid who didn't even have a voice to fight back. Atlas watched Hayes's hands, then the witnesses, tail low but stiff, breathing slower, stance tighter, little signals that said, something's wrong. I know it. I feel it. And honestly, the room felt it too. People in the audience exchanged looks, some uncomfortable, some annoyed, some starting to think Victor might be right. You could almost hear the shift, that silent, creeping doubt. Sophie pulled her legs up onto the seat, hugging her knees. Instinct, the way animals curl up when danger circles too close. Her breathing hitched. Atlas turned his head toward her, checking, just a second, then faced the room again. Back straight, eyes forward, alert. The judge called the final witness of the morning. A family friend, confident, rehearsed. And he said the same garbage. Good father, loving man, would never hurt anyone. Child is confused. Poor girl must be scared, but mistaken. Every sentence was a punch to Sophie's ribs. She flinched at each one. Hayes leaned forward, elbows on his knees, stare sharp enough to set the stand on fire. What a joke, he whispered. These people don't know a damn thing. Meanwhile, Atlas shifted his weight. Slow, controlled, eyes narrowing. Not aggressive, not defensive, focused. Dogs like Atlas make themselves that still when something deep in them recognizes a lie before humans even finish processing the words. But nobody saw that. Nobody but Hayes and Sophie. Sophie reached out, touched the top of Atlas's neck. One tap. The softest cue. I'm trying to stay calm. Atlas exhaled through his nose, steady, warm. But the real shift came next. Victor walked past Sophie on his way back to his table, leaning just slightly toward her. Not enough for a judge to notice. Not enough for anyone but her. And Atlas. He didn't speak. He didn't whisper. He just smiled. A smile so cold it should have frosted the air. Sophie folded, shoulders collapsing, fingers shaking uncontrollably. Atlas's ears snapped back fully. Hayes cursed under his breath. I swear, if that man smirks at her one more time. But he didn't finish. He didn't need to, because the whole courtroom felt it. The tension, the injustice, the raw, suffocating anger, not the loud kind, not the violent kind, the kind that builds like pressure under floorboards, waiting for one crack, one spark, to blow everything open. And no one realized it yet. But that spark? Yeah, it was already in the room, hidden under Atlas's fur. Waiting. And the thing is, after all those fake witnesses, all those pretty lies wrapped in Sunday church voices, the courtroom felt like it was tipping. Slow at first. Dangerous. Like everyone was leaning toward believing the wrong side. And that pressure? Yeah. It landed right on Sophie's shoulders. The moment Victor Klein sat down, smug, polished, pleased with himself, the air in the courtroom got heavier. Not noisy, not chaotic, just thick. You know that feeling right before a storm hits? That strange quiet where everything feels too still? That's what settled over Sophie. Her breathing got tight. Not panicked like before. Worse. Small. Shallow. Like she was trying to inhale through a straw. Her fingers dug into her sleeves. Her shoulders trembled. So lightly, most people wouldn't notice. But Atlas did. Of course he did. He shifted closer, pressing his shoulder into her shin. Just enough to say, "Hey, I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." Sophie blinked fast, fighting the sting behind her eyes. She wasn't crying. Not yet. But the pressure was there. Sharp, burning, waiting. Victor pretended he didn't see. Victor always pretended. Hayes saw everything. He leaned forward, whispering gently, "It's okay, kiddo. You're doing good. Just breathe. You got Atlas. You got me." But Sophie barely heard him. Her ears were ringing, the way they do when panic floods the body and the world gets too loud and too quiet at the same time. Atlas's tail flicked once. Sophie looked down. He wasn't looking at her. He stared straight ahead, alert, steady, shoulders squared like a wall. But that tiny movement of the tail? A message. Quiet. Patient. You're safe. Sophie swallowed hard, lip trembling, hand pressed to her chest, trying to slow the pounding. Her breath hitched again. Hayes noticed instantly. Follow Atlas, his breathing, slow like that. But Sophie shook her head, a tiny, trembling no, because breathing wasn't fixing it anymore. Her mind kept replaying Victor's whisper from the first day, over and over. If you open your mouth, that dog dies first. And the worst part? She believed him. Her hands shook harder, shoulders contracted, breath coming in tiny, painful hiccups. She wanted to speak. God, she wanted to scream the truth until her voice broke. But she couldn't. Not with that threat lodged in her bones. And that's when Atlas did it. The smallest, softest move he could make. He lifted one paw and nudged her ankle, barely, like a whisper. Sophie gasped. A tiny, sharp gasp that cut through the silence inside her. And then she did something she didn't plan, didn't think about, didn't rehearse. She touched his collar, 2 fingers, shaking, slow. She slid them along his fur, and then tap, tap. Hayes's heart nearly jumped out of his chest, because he knew exactly what that meant. Sophie hadn't used that signal in the hallway, not in therapy, not once, but now. 2 taps meant, please, I want to speak, but I can't, say it for me. Hayes froze, eyes wide. You remember? You remember the signals? Atlas didn't move, not one muscle, but under his thick coat, a tiny red LED, no bigger than a grain of rice, blinked once. Time 1200 flums, just once. But that blink hit Hayes like a truck. The recording device was armed. Armed because Sophie asked. Armed because she tapped twice. Armed because this silent, broken kid was trying to fight her way out of a cage made of trauma and fear. And she had only one weapon she trusted. Atlas. Hayes leaned closer, voice barely a breath. You want the truth recorded. Is that what this is? You want him to hear? To speak for you? Sophie didn't nod, didn't look up, didn't move. But her hand stayed on the collar, trembling, determined. Atlas blinked slowly. He knew. Of course he knew. His breathing steadied, calm, deliberate, giving her courage one inhale at a time. Hayes pressed a hand to his forehead, whispering, Holy. She remembered. She actually remembered. And in that moment, something woke up in the room. Not noise, not shock, not confrontation, hope. Small, quiet, almost invisible, but hope. And the crazy part, it didn't come from lawyers, or evidence, or arguments, or adults. It came from a little girl tapping the neck of a dog who had never once failed her. He stood up with that same cocky calm, smoothing his tie, smiling like he'd already won. Again. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, stepping toward the jury with this grand little flourish. "Let's not forget something critical here." He paused. Victor loved pausing. He treated every second like a spotlight. "We cannot, absolutely cannot, base a man's future on a child's imagination." He tapped the table like he was delivering gospel. "Children see shadows and call them monsters. They hear noises and think danger. We cannot rely on that." A few jurors nodded. One even sighed like she'd just been convinced. Victor went in for the kill. "Do we really believe," he said, voice syrupy sweet, "that this terrified little girl—" He gestured lazily towards Sophie without even looking at her. "Saw the truth clearly that night?" He smiled. As heartbreaking as her silence is, it is just that silence, and silence, my friends, is not evidence. That was it. The moment. Sophie's shoulders jerked just a tiny bit, and Atlas's ears shot up. Hayes saw it. Hayes felt it. And Hayes moved. He didn't raise a polite hand, didn't clear his throat, didn't ask permission. He stood up so fast his chair slammed into the bench behind him. "Your Honor," he said, voice tight, "we do have evidence." The whole room turned. Victor blinked, thrown off his rhythm. "I'm sorry. What evidence? There is no—" Click. That sound. God. It hit the room like a gunshot made of electricity. A tiny click. Barely audible. But every single person froze. Even Atlas went still. Except for the faint glow beneath his fur. The little red LED Sophie had activated minutes earlier. And then a voice filled the courtroom. Victor's voice. But not his slick courtroom voice. Not the fake, sweet, polished attorney voice. No. It was the voice he used the day he leaned down to Sophie's ear. The voice dipped in venom. "If you open that mouth of yours, that dog dies first." Gasps erupted across the room. A woman grabbed her chest. A juror's pen clattered to the floor. The judge's eyebrows shot up like they were trying to escape his face. Victor's skin drained of color. That is taken out of—" The recording continued, crystal clear. "Get rid of the files before morning, and make sure the tech deletes the backup photos." More gasps. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." Then, "I don't care what he saw. Pay him. Everyone lies for the right price." One juror lifted a hand to her mouth. Another whispered, "He bribed people?" Victor stumbled, shouting, "Your Honor! Your Honor! This is manipulated! This is illegal!" But the recording didn't care. And then came the worst one. "Don't be stupid. If the kid talks, we're done. Keep her quiet." A folder dropped somewhere in the back, papers scattering like snow. A police officer whispered, voice cracking, "Jesus Christ." Victor tried shouting over it, "Shut it off! Shut it off!" But the judge slammed his gavel so hard the windows rattled. "Sit down, counselor. Victor didn't sit. He collapsed into his chair, pale as a ghost. The recording clicked off. Silence swallowed the room. Not courtroom silence. Not polite silence. The kind of silence that comes after an explosion. And right in the middle of it, Sophie broke. But not with fear. Not this time. She sobbed. Loud. Ugly. Messy. Alive. She threw both arms around Atlas's neck, burying her face in his fur, shaking as she cried for the first time, not from terror, but from relief. From release. From someone finally speaking the words she never could. Atlas didn't move, didn't even blink. He leaned into her, just slightly, letting her cling like he was the only solid thing left in the world. Hayes's eyes warmed, softened, his voice cracking as he whispered, "There it is. She's free." The judge removed his glasses slowly, staring down at Victor like he'd never seen anything more disgusting in his life. Bailiffs stepped forward. Victor whispered, frantic, "No, no, please, this is all..." But no one listened. The room had already chosen a side, and for the first time ever, it wasn't his. The jurors looked at Sophie, not with pity, with belief, with understanding, with respect. And Sophie held Atlas tighter, tears soaking his fur, trembling as the weight she'd carried for months finally cracked and fell away. She wasn't alone anymore. Her voice had been heard, even though she didn't speak a single word. He shot up from his chair so fast it scraped across the marble floor. That audio is fake," he shouted, voice cracking like a kid caught stealing instead of a lawyer defending himself. "Do you hear me? Fake. Fabricated. You can't... This is illegal." His hands flailed, his tie crooked, sweat forming at his temples. The man was unraveling in real time. The judge slammed his gavel. "Counselor, sit down." But Victor wasn't listening. He was too busy clawing at the walls of his own sinking ship. "That dog," he jabbed a shaking finger at Atlas. "That stupid dog recorded me without consent. This whole thing is a setup. She's manipulating you." He pointed at Sophie now, a 9-year-old, silent, terrified, and somehow in his mind, the mastermind behind a conspiracy. Sophie flinched, burying her face deeper into Atlas's neck. Atlas didn't move, didn't flick an ear. He just stared at Victor. Calm, steady, unblinking. The kind of stare that said, "I know what you did, and everyone else knows now too." Victor froze. It was almost funny. A grown man stopped talking because a dog looked at him. But this wasn't fear of teeth. He knew Atlas wouldn't bite. No. This was the fear you feel when someone sees the real you. The judge leaned forward, voice low, deadly serious. "Mr. Klein, do you deny that the voice on that recording is yours?" Victor opened his mouth, and nothing came out. Not a word. Not a lie. Not even a stutter. The room went silent. Even the fluorescent lights seemed to shut up. And then, "Bailiffs," the judge said, "take Mr. Klein into custody." It was like popping the lid off a pressure cooker. Two officers moved instantly, one grabbing Victor's wrist, the other twisting his arm behind his back. "No, no, get your hands off me! This is wrong! This is some kind of trick!" He kicked at the floor, struggling like a trapped animal. His polished shoes squeaked in the most pathetic way. One bailiff muttered, "Yeah, keep yelling. That'll help." The cuffs clicked. Click. It echoed like a final verdict. And then, the wildest thing happened. The courtroom erupted. Not in chaos, not in shouting, in applause. Loud, raw, cathartic. Like everyone had been holding their breath for hours, and finally exhaled at the same time. People stood. Some clapped through tears. A couple jurors wiped their faces. Hayes let out a breath he'd been holding since the first day. "About damn time," he whispered. But the only person who wasn't watching Victor get dragged away was Sophie. Her whole body shook. Not like earlier, when fear hollowed her out, but in a different way. A releasing way. Like something inside her finally cracked open and didn't hurt anymore. She threw her arms tighter around Atlas's neck, burying her face in his fur like she was clinging to life itself. Her voice made no sound. She still couldn't speak. But her sobs came out in silent tremors that shook her shoulders. Not fear, not panic. A flood. Months of trapped emotion finally escaping. Atlas shifted, wrapping himself around her, leaning into her, keeping her from curling in on herself. He let her cry into him, completely still except for one slow blink, and the soft thump of his tail tapping the floor once. Just once. Hayes knelt beside them, voice breaking despite trying so hard to stay steady. Pitch, first rate, slow. "It's okay, Sophie. You're okay. You're okay now. He heard you. We all heard you." Sophie clung to Atlas tighter, fingers twisting into his fur like she never wanted to let go. Atlas breathed slow and steady, letting her match him breath for breath. Hayes wiped at his eyes quickly, pretending it was dust. It wasn't. Everyone knew it wasn't. Even the judge paused, throat tight, watching the girl and the dog like they were the only honest thing in the entire room. Victor screamed from the hallway as they dragged him away, but nobody listened. Nobody cared. The only sound that mattered was Sophie's soft, shaking breaths as she slowly began to settle, safe in the fur of the one creature who never doubted her, never questioned her, never pressured her, never abandoned her. Justice didn't arrive with fireworks. It didn't arrive with dramatic speeches. It arrived with a dog sitting still, and a little girl finally letting herself cry. If the explosion in the courtroom was the moment justice finally screamed loud enough for everyone to hear, then what came after? Yeah, that was the quiet, the good kind, The kind that settles over you like a warm blanket after a storm so loud it rattled your bones. Everything slowed down once Victor Klein was dragged out. The applause faded. People trickled out, whispering, still shocked. The judge retreated to his chambers, rubbing his eyes like he needed a moment to absorb what he'd just witnessed. And in the middle of all that, Sophie was still holding on to Atlas, like he was the only thing tethering her to the earth. Hayes walked over slowly, almost tiptoeing, like he didn't want to break the fragile moment she was wrapped in. "Hey," he said softly, kneeling beside her. We gotta take this off him now." He reached gently under Atlas's collar, fingers brushing the tiny recorder Sophie had activated with her 2 taps. Atlas didn't fight it, didn't pull away, didn't shift. He stood perfectly still, like he had during duty years ago. There was a soft, metallic click, and the recorder came free. Hayes held it in his palm, staring at it like some relic from a world where courage had been forced to hide inside tiny pieces of metal. Then he handed it to Sophie, her small hands cupped around it. Careful, gentle. But then she shook her head. Just a little. Barely. She pushed the recorder back toward Hayes. He frowned softly. "It's yours, kiddo. You helped expose the truth. You should have it." But Sophie kept shaking her head. Then she pressed her palm against Atlas's shoulder. Her lips parted. Not to speak, she still couldn't. But she breathed out this tiny, trembling sound that almost felt like words. Hayes didn't understand, but Atlas did. He tilted his head, leaning into her hand. And then Sophie finally managed something. Not speech, not voice, but enough breath to form the tiniest whisper of a thought. "Not this. Him." She tapped her chest, then touched Atlas. Hayes's eyes softened instantly. "Yeah," he murmured, voice catching. "Yeah, kid. I get it." He looked at Atlas, who blinked back calmly. "It wasn't the recorder that saved you. It was him." Sophie nodded. Quick, urgent, like she needed him to understand completely. Hayes swallowed hard, wiping his cheek quickly, like he didn't want anyone to notice the shine in his eyes. "All right, hold on." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled something wrapped in soft cloth. Sophie tilted her head, curious. Hayes unwrapped it slowly. Inside was a small silver tag. Thin, simple, etched with a single word. Home. He looked embarrassed as he held it up. "I, had it made a few days ago. Wasn't sure when the right time would be. Guess that time is now." Sophie's eyes widened. Not in fear, not in panic, in warmth. Hayes placed the tag in her hand. "You put it on him," he whispered. "If you want." Sophie moved slowly, like she wasn't sure she was allowed to do something this important. Her fingers brushed Atlas's collar. Atlas lowered his head, making it easier. Tap, Tap. The soft sound of metal locking into place. Sophie sat back, staring at the tag like she'd attached a piece of her soul to him. Hayes smiled. You just gave him a new job title. Sophie leaned forward and pressed her forehead to Atlas's forehead. Soft, gentle, like a promise whispered in a language only they understood. Breathed out. A deep, warm exhale that brushed her cheek. Then, in a move so natural it almost broke Hayes's heart, Atlas nudged her gently between the eyebrows. A tiny boop. Soft. Tender. Like he was telling her, "You're safe. You're mine. You're home." Sophie shut her eyes and leaned into him, tears slipping down silently. Not terrified tears, not desperate tears. Relieved tears. The kind that come when someone puts a roof back over your heart after the world tore it off. Hayes sat beside them, quiet, watching the girl and the dog who saved each other in ways no one would ever fully understand. He ran a hand down Atlas's back. You earned your retirement, buddy, he whispered. But I guess you weren't done yet, huh? Atlas flicked an ear, his version of a shrug. Sophie touched the silver tag again, tracing the letters. Home. She didn't need to speak it, didn't need to explain. Some things don't need voices. Some don't need language. Some things are understood the moment you feel them. And right there, sitting on a quiet courtroom bench, Sophie Lane felt something she thought she'd lost forever. Belonging. It was 11 years later. 2035. Clearwater had changed. Traffic got louder. Buildings stood taller. People moved faster. Even the air felt different, like time had stretched the whole town into something slightly sharper at the edges. But the memorial garden at the Clearwater K9 unit? That place never changed. It still sat behind the training field, tucked between tall pine trees that whispered whenever the wind passed through. Soft, steady, familiar, kind of like breathing. And on a warm Sunday afternoon in early September, Sophie Lane stepped through the garden gate for the first time in years. She wasn't the trembling little girl everyone remembered. Not anymore. She was 20 now. Tall, steady, dressed in soft earth tones and wearing an ID badge clipped to her belt. Sophie Lane, child trauma therapist, Clearwater Community Outreach Center, yeah. She'd come a long way. Her hair was longer now, brushing her shoulders when the wind moved. Her eyes, still bright, still gentle, held something new. Purpose. She carried a bouquet of white lilies in one hand and something silver in the other, a tiny, worn tag on a chain. The word faded, but still readable. Home. She walked down the stone path, reading each engraved name as she passed. Dogs she'd never met. Dogs who served before she was born. Dogs who gave everything without asking for anything back. Her steps slowed when she reached the third row. There it was. Atlas K9 Unit 214 Service Years, 2011-2025 Loyal, brave, loved. Sophie exhaled shakily. Even after all this time, her chest tightened the moment she saw his name. Not painful, just heavy, the good kind of heavy, filled with memories. She knelt, brushing pine needles from the base of the stone, then placed the lilies beneath his name. For a moment, she didn't speak, didn't move, just listened. The wind rustled the branches above, soft, rhythmic, steady, and for a second, just one, she swore it sounded like Atlas breathing beside her again. Sophie smiled, eyes stinging warmly. "Hey, Atlas," she whispered, voice quiet, but stronger than it ever was as a child. "It's been a while. I, uh, I started my job last month," she continued, tracing the carved letters. "A real one. I help kids now. Kids well, like I was." She let out a breathy, embarrassed laugh. "You'd like them, you know. Some of them even remind me of me. The way I used to sit there, terrified to move, terrified to talk. And every time I see that look, I think about you." A pine cone dropped somewhere behind her. Small, harmless, but it made her smile wider. She lifted the silver tag, the one she'd clipped on his collar years ago. Home. "I kept this," she said softly. "I couldn't throw it in a drawer. Felt wrong, like I'd be leaving a part of you behind." She breathed in slowly, grounding herself the same way she used to match her breathing to his. "You gave me my voice back," she whispered, "piece by piece. You held me together when I didn't even know I was breaking. And now I'm helping other kids find theirs." She closed her eyes. A breeze brushed her cheek, warm, soft, almost like a nuzzle. Sophie leaned forward, touching her forehead to the cool stone, just like she once did to his fur. "Thank you," she whispered, "for saving me, for staying, for everything." Her fingers tightened around the tag before she set it down gently beside the lilies, returning something sacred to where it belonged. Above her, the wind shifted, whistling through the trees with a low, warm hum, almost like Atlas exhaling. Sophie stood, brushing pine needles from her knees. She looked at the stone one last time, voice trembling not with fear, but with love that survived more than a decade. "Here's the truth, Atlas. You gave me a voice. And now, I'm using it to help the kids who haven't found theirs yet." The pines rustled, sunlight flickered through the branches, and for a brief second, it felt like Atlas was right beside her, tail sweeping once against the ground, saying, "I'm proud of you." Sophie smiled through tears that didn't hurt anymore. "Goodbye, boy," she whispered. "I'll come back." And with that, she turned toward the garden path, carrying the legacy of a dog who never spoke, but changed her life with a silence that still echoed in her heart. And walking away from Atlas's memorial could have been the end of it. But something tugged at Sophie, soft, persistent, like the kind of nudge Atlas used to give her whenever he thought she needed to stop and breathe. So she turned back. The garden was quiet, the sun dipping low behind the pines, painting the memorial stones in warm gold. The air smelled like sap and dry grass, like summers she barely remembered and winters she'd somehow survived. Sophie stepped toward Atlas's stone again, slowly, like she wasn't quite ready to let go. Her fingers brushed the engraved letters, cool against her skin. ATLAS. Even carved in granite, his name still felt alive, still felt like protection, still felt like home. She closed her eyes, resting her forehead lightly against the stone, mirroring a gesture she'd once given him the day everything in her life changed. And in that quiet, she spoke to him the way she used to when he was lying beside her, paws tucked under his chest, ears twitching at every tiny sound. "Hey," she whispered. "I know I already said all the important stuff, but there's one more thing." Her voice cracked, not from pain, but from gratitude so deep it felt like it lived in her bones. "You remember that day in court?" she murmured. "The big one? The one everybody still talks about?" She let out a soft laugh. "I was shaking so hard I thought my heart was going to fall right out of my chest. I couldn't breathe, I couldn't think, I couldn't—" She paused, the memory washing over her like warm water and cold air all at once. "And then I touched your collar," she whispered. "Just twice. Barely even a tap. Honestly, I didn't think you'd notice. I don't know what I thought, really. I needed help. I needed you." Her throat tightened. Full, not broken. "And you knew, God, Atlas. You understood everything I meant, without me saying a word." A tear slid down her cheek, but she didn't wipe it away. It wasn't a sad tear. It was a memory allowed to breathe. She traced the letters again, slower this time. "That's what I came here to tell you," she said. "That moment, that tiny moment, it changed my whole life. People don't get it when I try to explain. They think it's dramatic or symbolic or whatever." Her voice softened. "But for me, it was survival." The wind rustled the branches overhead, gentle, rhythmic, like breathing. Sophie smiled up at the trees. "See? Even the pines remember you." She knelt, both hands resting on the stone. "I know I do, every single day." She inhaled slowly, letting the air settle deep in her chest, letting her shoulders loosen in a way they rarely did outside this garden. Then she said it, the words she had held for years. "Nge da, em chi vot hai lun." Her voice trembled. "An hiu tut ka." She'd never said it out loud. Not in English. Not in Vietnamese. Never outside her own head. But here, it felt right. She blinked up at the sky, eyes glistening. "You taught me that the world doesn't need to hear me for my truth to matter. You taught me that silence isn't weakness. It's just a different language." She smiled, soft, steady. "And you taught me that some bonds don't need words. They just need courage and a signal." The last ray of sunlight caught the silver tag on the stone, making it shimmer, almost like Atlas's old collar glowing again. Sophie leaned down, pressing a gentle kiss to the top edge of the stone. "Goodbye, boy," she whispered. "Not forever. Just until next time." She straightened, brushing dirt from her palms, turning toward the path that led out of the garden. With each step, the breeze picked up. Soft dips and rises, like someone walking beside her, nudging her forward, keeping pace. She reached the gate, put a hand on the latch, paused. Because healing doesn't mean never looking back. Sometimes, looking back is part of healing. She turned one last time. The pine branches swayed in a slow, steady rhythm, breathing. Sophie smiled, a sad smile, but a real one. A grown-up version of the little girl who once hid behind silence. "Thank you for listening when I couldn't speak." And with that, she stepped through the gate, carrying the legacy of a dog who never said a word, but understood everything.